Good afternoon, everyone. The region that we're going to present is the Middle East region. There are 17 countries in the Middle East region, but only 14 countries are colonized by European power. Later, I will tell you why the remaining 3 countries are not colonized. Bahrain. Bahrain was ruled by Portugal in the 16th century and sinundan ito ng Persia in 1602 till 1783. Then the Persians were expelled by an Arabian family that established dynasty na Al-Khalifas. But in 1861, effectively turned Bahrain into a British protectorate. In this time, the Bahrain were given the British control over defense and foreign relations. And during this period, ang Bahrain ang naging center ng commercial operations ng British sa region. Gained independence from the United Kingdom in 1971 and has since maintained strong diplomatic, military, and trade relations. So, nag-declared ng independence ang Bahrain after signing a friendship treaty or kasunduan, and they are terminating previous agreement between the two sides. After that independence, bumalik sa Al-Khalifa ang pamumuno, or tinatawag ngayong the House of Khalifa. It's a ruling family of the Kingdom of Bahrain. And yung kanilang current family head proclaimed himself as the King of Bahrain noong 2002 till now. Next, Cyprus. Cyprus is an island country located in the Mediterranean Sea. At itong island nito was an ideal location between many of the Eastern and Western empires. Kaya siya naging ideal location kasi kagaya ng Pilipinas, nasa gitna rin ito ng tubig. Kumbaga, nahihiwalay siya sa iba pang mga bansa. As a result, the island was part of many great ancient civilizations, including ancient Egypt, Persia, and Roman Empire throughout the history. In 1878, Great Britain took over the island and made it an official British colony in 1925. 1960, Cyprus gained its independence from Great Britain. But they are divided into two sections kasi hindi nagkasundo-sundo yung mga pangkat sa bansa niyan. Kaya meron silang buffer zone where the United Nations keeps a peacekeeping force. So, one side is controlled by the government and the other by the Turkish Cypriots. Greek is the spoken in the south and Turkish in the north. Next, Egypt. Ancient Egypt was one of the oldest and longest-lasting world civilizations. Was located along the Nile River in northeast Africa. The Nile was the source of their wealth or kanilang likas na yaman. And there are two ways to outline their history. First, dynasties. These are families that had power and passed the leadership of Pharaoh down from one family member to another. Pharaoh means head of state and also the religious leader of their people. There were over 30 dynasties that ruled ancient Egypt. This was over the course of 3,000 years. Second, kingdoms. There are 3 primary kingdoms that used to define periods of ancient Egypt: Old, Middle, and New Kingdom. Dynasties 25 up to 30 are often referred to as the late period. Egypt was sometimes under the control of foreign powers during this period. Dito nagumpisa na sinasakop na ang ancient Egypt ng mga taga-ibang lugar or bansa. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great drove the Persians out of Egypt. Bago dumating si Alexander the Great, Persians ang nagkokontrol sa Egypt at siya ang nakapagpaalis dito. And incorporated this country into the Macedonian Empire. Alexander is a Macedonian and belongs to this empire. He is also the founder of Ptolemaic dynasty. Then after mamatay ni Alexander the Great, si Cleopatra VII ang namuno. She is Alexander's general kaya siya ang sumunod. At siya rin ang tinaguriang the last ruler of Ptolemaic dynasty. But she was committed suicide after the defeat of her forces by Roman Emperor Augustus at the Battle of Actium. And after her death, Egypt was incorporated into the Roman Empire. From 1882 to 1922, Britain formally occupied Egypt and controlled its government. Noong 1882, British troops attack and defeat Egyptian armies. So that's why they take control of this country. The Egyptian Revolution of 1919 against the British occupation resulting the independence of Egypt in 1922. Noong 1919, nagkaroon ng malaking revolution sa tulong ng mga students, professional and workers to force the British to declare independence for Egypt. At na-recognize ito ng United Kingdom noong 1922 as the Kingdom of Egypt Independence. Iraq. The land now known as Iraq has been called the cradle of civilization. The ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians all developed great empires in the region between Tigris and Euphrates River. But these great empires na-colonized din ng mga Greeks, Romans, Persian, and the Ottoman Turks. Noong 750 up to 1258, the Baghdad, which is the capital of Iraq, became a center of learning for the entire Muslim world. Noong 1914, World War I begins. Naging ally ang Ottoman ng Germany and Austria. Ang British troops invade Iraq and take control of Baghdad. Noong natapos ang World War I, the Ottomans lose the war. So, noong 1920, the Great Britain was given control of the region as a mandate of the League of Nations. But the mandate lasted from 1920 to 1932 because in 1932, Iraq became an independent constitutional monarchy under King Faisal I. In 1921, the monarchy was organized under British protection, and in 1932, the Kingdom of Iraq was granted independence from Great Britain. Next one, Israel. The timeline starts with Abraham, the founder of the Jewish people who lived about 2000 BC. Jewish people, these are the people of Israel. Itong history na to ng Israel, medyo familiar siya sa atin or sa iba kasi nababasa din siya sa Bible. And there are times na may evidence talaga na nag-exist ito. Like Abraham. He is even named outside the Bible in ancient clay tablets dated around 1950 before Christ. The timeline continues when Abraham's descendants were slaves in Egypt. Ito yung time na si Joseph or the great grandson of Abraham, nilid niya yung mga Israelites papuntang Egypt kung saan naging alipin sila for many years. Itong scene na to, mababasa natin to sa Bible, pero history talaga ito ng Israel. Israelites become a nation under GD. Meaning ng G/D is God. Kaya ganyan ang spelling niyan kasi hindi nila in-spell out ang name ng kanilang creator, which is si God, kahit sa English spelling. Moses led the Israelites out of Egypt with the Passover plague, which destroyed Egypt and allowed the Israelites from Egypt to the land of Israel. Kung familiar kayo, nasa Bible to, ito yung time na pinalaya ni Moises ang mga taga-Israel mula sa pang-aalipin ng Egypt. And for several hundred years, they lived in their land, but they did not have a king. Not until David establishes a royal dynasty at Jerusalem. David conquered Jerusalem and made it his capital city. At dito naniniwala siya na may darating na Messiah or the true king. Then kahit nung nawala na si David, nagpatuloy pa rin ang kanilang descendants sa pamumuno or continued to rule for about 400 years. Then finally in 600 BC, the crisis happened. Ito yung time na dumating si Nebuchadnezzar, a powerful Babylonian king, at sinakop sila. After that, Persian Emperor Cyrus conquered Babylon and he became the power of the world. At sinauli din niya sa mga Jews or Israelites ang kanilang bansa mula sa pagkakasakop ng Babylonian. Pero hindi rin nagtagal ang kanilang pagiging independent dahil sila ay naging province of Persian Empire. After many years, Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire and the Jews had a province in the Greek empires for another years. Then Roman period. Romans become the dominant world power. So dahil sinakop naman sila ng Roman Empire, ang mga Israelites became a province in this empire. Ito yung time na buhay na si Jesus, or ito yung time niya dito sa earth. So this why Romans or Roman government is so prominent in the New Testaments, because Rome ruled supreme at this time. From 1517 to 1917, after Jesus Christ na to, Israel along with much of the Middle East was ruled by the Ottoman Empire. So, Ottoman Empire naman ang sumakop sa kanila. Then after the World War I in 1918, the 400-year Ottoman Empire ruled was ended and tinake over ito ng Great Britain. Then, noong May 1948, Israel was officially declared an independent state. Next country is Kuwait. The origin of the city of Kuwait or the state of Kuwait is usually placed at about the beginning of the 18th century, when the Banu or Bani Utsub, a group of families of the Anisa tribe in the interior of the Arabian Peninsula, migrated to the area that is now Kuwait. So, itong tribe na to ang nakadiscover after nila mag-migrate sa area at nagtayo ng state. The Sheikhdom became a British protectorate between 1899 and 1961 after the Anglo-Kuwaiti Agreement of 1899 between Sheikh Murabak al-Sabah and the British government sa India. Ibig sabihin ng Sheikh, Arab leader or the leader in a Muslim community or organization. And then yung Sheikhdom naman, ito yung pinamamahalaan ng Sheikh or ng leader. So, naging British protectorate ito after mag-sign ng secret treaty ang British Empire at ang Kuwait. Under this provision, nag-pledge ang British na or nangako sila na poprotektahan ang teritoryo ng Kuwait kapalit ng pag-access sa kanilang foreign powers doon sa Sheikhdom. At British ang magre-regulate ng kanilang internal affairs. Nagkaroon kasi ng threat ang kanilang independence sa Ottoman Empire, kaya kailangan nila ang tulong ng British. Noong 1946 to 1982, tinatawag nila itong Golden Era because they experienced a prosperity driven by oil and its liberal atmosphere. At noong 1950, they enjoy a modern standard of living dahil maraming major public work program at allowed ang mga tao na i-enjoy or gamitin ito. At dahil din ito sa sagana nilang oil, kaya tumaas ang kanilang standard of living. And they are become the largest oil exporter in Persian Gulf in 1952. Then, naging independent ulit ang Kuwait noong 1961 with the end of the British Protectorate. Next, Lebanon. Noong 1516 to 1918, Lebanon became part of the Ottoman Empire. So, they was ruled by this empire since the 16th century. Then, after that, naging under sila ng French control since the First World War. And Lebanon was mandated to under a League of Nations. Then, May 1926, the Lebanese Constitution is drawn up and the Lebanese Republic is declared. 1941, the British and French forces was occupied the Lebanon, then the independence movement begins. And no November 22, 1943, French mandate over Lebanon ended after 23 years of colonial rule. So this time, the France agreed to transfer the power to the Lebanese government. Pero hindi pa umaalis ang French troops sa kanilang bansa until 1946. 1943 ang kanilang independence, pero 1946 sila tuluyan naging malaya because British and French troops withdrew by that time. Next, Oman. Oman became an Islamic country early in its history in the 7th century, and for most of Oman's history, it has remained an independent country. Malaki yung naging role ng Oman when it comes to trading sa may Silk Road kasi yung location ng country is nasa tip ng Arabian Peninsula and siya ang nagsiserve as gateway sa lahat ng ships na dadaan sa Strait of Hormuz, Indian Ocean or kahit sa Arabian Sea. But there was a time when Persia conquered portions of the country as well as the time when the Portuguese set up fortifications along Oman's coast. Fortifications mean the Portuguese strengthened that place against attack. Maybe nagtayo sila dyan ng defensive wall, basta pinatatag nila yan para hindi lusubin ng iba pang mga pangkat. In 1650, Oman managed to remove the Portuguese from their country. So, napaalis ng Oman ang Portuguese sa kanilang bansa at expand ng Oman ang kanilang empire into the east coast of Africa and the southern Arabian Peninsula. So, that's why yung Oman naging most powerful country in Arabia noong 1880s. Naging strong allies din pala sila ng Britain during this time. But the British was kept to dominate Southeast Arabia to curb the influence of other European powers and to weaken the Omani Empire. So, binalak na British na sakupin ang mga Omani. And noong 1798, nag-sign ng Treaty of Friendship ang Oman and British. And by 1891, Oman and Muscat had become a British protectorate. Then, during the 19th century, Muscat and Oman and the United Kingdom concluded several treaties of friendship and commerce. In this period, nag-enforce ang British ng anti-slavery policy sa mga leader and traders ng Oman. And this is effectively enforced to help the Omani economy. And by the time of 1908, United Kingdom recognized the Sultanate of Muscat and Oman as a fully independent state. Palestine is a small region of land and played a prominent role in the ancient and modern history of Middle East. From about 1517 to 1917, the Ottoman Empire ruled much of this region. So, bali ilang years sinakop ng Ottoman Empire itong bansa. Pero nung natapos ang World War I, noong 1918, kinontrol ito ng British. And the League of Nations issued a British mandate for Palestine that giving Britain administrative control over the region. In 1947, after more than 2 decades of British rule, the United Nations proposed a plan. So, nung nagkakagulo na dito sa bansang Palestine, nagpropose ang UN na paghiwalayin into 2 sections ang bansang to. Independent Jewish state and an independent Arab state. Noong time din kasi neto, parehas inangkin ng mga Jews and Palestinian Arabs ang Jerusalem. So, yung Jerusalem, naging international territory with a special status. So, yun nga, inaccept ng mga Jewish leaders ang proposed plan, pero hindi pumayag ang Palestinian Arabs. Diba British Protectorate ang Palestine? So, nagkaroon pa rin ng active fighting ang British and ang mga Jew dahil sa kanilang interes sa region na to. Then, noong 1948, less than a year after ma-introduce yung partition plan for Palestine, Britain withdrew from Palestine and Israel. So, ito yung time na in-announce ng Britain na iti-terminate na nila yung mandates nila sa Palestine. And the Palestine declared itself an independent state. And they are willing now to implement the partition plan. Next country is Qatar. Qatar was once controlled by the Sheikhs of Bahrain. Again, Sheikh is an Arab leader. But in 1867, war broke out between the people and their absentee rulers. Isa sa mga dahilan ng kanilang kaguluhan ay dahil wala silang sariling namumuno. So, para matigil ito and to keep peace sa Persian Gulf, in-installed or inassigned ng British ang head of the leading Qatari family as the region's ruler. So, yon nagkaroon sila ng sariling leader na tinatawag na Emir. In 1893, Ottoman Turks made incursions into Qatar. So, nilusob sila ng Ottoman Turks pero matatag ang kanilang emir o leader kaya hindi nagtagumpay ang paglusob sa kanila. In 1916, the emir agreed to allow Qatar to become a British protectorate after they assigned a treaty. And British offered protection to Qatar that it was secure from any attacks on land and from the sea. And noong 1940s, na-discovered ang oil sa kanila na naging source ng kanilang yaman sa bansa. Then, Qatar became an independent state on September 3, 1971, when its treaty came to end. So, nagkaroon na sila ng sariling governance system or self-rule. So, the country rules itself. Next, Syria. Modern-day Syria, a country located in the Middle East on the shore of the Mediterranean Sea, is one of the most ancient inhabited regions on Earth. Syria is one of the country under Middle East and isa ito sa mga na-colonize ng mga European. During World War I, French and British diplomats secretly agreed to divide the Ottoman Empire into zones as part of the Agreement of 1916. Yung agreement na to ang nag-lead sa pagkakahati ng mga bansa under Middle East into administered areas ng French or British. Then, the French took control of modern-day Syria and Lebanon in 1920. And yung Syria nga is naging under-administered ng French. So, ang French na ang humawak sa kanila during this time. The French reign led to uprisings and revolts among the people in Syria. From 1925 to 1927, Syrians united against the French occupation in what's now known as the Great Syrian Revolt. Di nagustuhan ng mga Syrians yung pamamalakad ng mga French noon sa kanila, kaya noong 1925 to 1927, Syrians united against French and they called themselves as Great Syrian Revolt. In 1936, France and Syria negotiated a treaty of independence. So, instead of war, yung France and Syria nag-negotiate para sa independence ng Syrians. So, yung agreement nila is they allowed Syria become an independent country, but the military and economic power is still under by the France. Then, during World War II, British and French troops occupied Syria. Pero, hindi nagtagal, Syria officially became an independent country in 1946. Next country, United Arab Emirates. Trucial States ang pangalan dati ng UAE and meron itong 7 kingdoms na ang tawag ay Sheikdoms. Yung Trucial States, nagkaroon sila ng close bond sa British government sa pamamagitan became an independent country in 1946. Next country, United Arab Emirates. Trucial States ang pangalan dati ng UAE and meron itong 7 kingdoms na ang tawag ay Sheikdoms. Yung Trucial States, nagkaroon sila ng close bond sa British government sa pamamagitan ng pagpirma sa treaty noong 1892. Pero hindi naging officially na nasakop ng British government yung Trucial States. Naging British protectorate lang sila. Meaning, puprotektahan sila ng British sa kahit anong bansa na gustong manakop or kumuha ng kanilang land or kahit anong resources na meron yung Trucial States. And kapalit ng pagprotekta sa kanila ng British government, hindi pwede magbenta yung Trucial States ng lupa, sea or kahit anong resources nila na walang pahintulot ng British government. Noong December 1, 1971, nag-expire na yung British Protectorate Treaty na pinirmahan nila. And then, nag-decide na rin yung Britain na i-give up na yung Bahrain, Qatar, and Trucial States. Ang pinakagusto mangyari ng Britain is pagsamahin ang Bahrain, Qatar, and Trucial States, which is yung 7 Kingdom. Pero hindi ito nangyari. Then, noong December 2, 1971, 6 out of 7 kingdoms yung nagsama-sama at nag-agree na mag-join sa federation. And they signed the Act of Union to create the United Arab Emirates. So, noong December 21, 1971, the United Arab Emirates was formed, or the union of 6 small kingdoms. Next, Yemen. In 1500s, Ottomans absorbed part of Yemen into their empire, but expelled in the 1600s. And then, noong 1839, Aden comes under British rule. And during this period, nag-open yung Suez Canal na naging major refueling port sa bansang Yemen. Yung Aden pala ay part ng Yemen in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. At the end of the World War I, noong 1918, the North Yemen became independent when the departure of the Ottoman forces. At ang namuno sa kanila si Imam Yahya na na-assassinate noong 1948 and yung pumalit sa kanya ang kanyang anak na si Ahmad. And the British retained control over the south, which they considered strategically and economically important to their empire. Although nawala ng Ottoman Empire sa North Yemen, nananatili pa rin pinamumunuan ng British ang South. And finally, noong 1968, Britain announced that it would leave Southern Arabia, so that's when they gained their independence. Then yung mga bansa naman sa Middle East na hindi na-colonize, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. Kaya hindi na-colonize ang Turkey because Turkey is the head of the Ottoman Empire from 16th century and so on. Kinontrol nito yung ibang parts ng Europe and ng North Africa. Then nung na-defeat ang European powers noong World War I after having loss of North African provinces, nawala na rin ang colonization ng Ottoman Empire pero nanatili pa rin silang independent throughout. Yung Iran naman kaya hindi na-colonize kasi sila ang Persian Empire at naging part ng Islamic Empire. And yung Saudi naman kaya hindi na-colonize kasi naging close ally siya ng United Kingdom at nakapagtulong siya or yung Saudi para talunin ang Ottoman Empire noong World War I. At saka naging protector din nila ang US. So yun ang dahilan kung bakit hindi sila na-colonize. Meaning to say, sila ang malalakas na bansa sa part ng Middle East region.